Good morning, and welcome to the Africa Weekly Talk. Today's subject on the docket is the 79th UN General Assembly session, currently taking place in New York. But fellows, as we all know about these UN General Assembly sessions that takes place every year, where you have various leaders from various countries, as well as CEOs from various corporations, NGOs, leaders of the World Bank, IMF, all converge at the UN, where they discuss and talk about global issues, mainly conflicts around the world, as well as the economic situation around the world. But fellows, at this year's Africa Global Initiative that was organized by Africa Networks, was Africa's greatest and richest industrialist, Aliko Dangote of Nigeria, where he had a sit-down interview with News Central and talk about Africa's socio-economic development, mainly agriculture, as being the key factor to Africa's socio-economic development. So fellows, before I dive into this subject today, let's go ahead and hear what Chairman Aliko Dangote had to say with regards to Africa's socio-economic development, especially when it comes to agriculture. And I will come back and share my view and also dissect this whole socio-economic development issues facing Africa. So let's go ahead and hear what Chairman Aliko Dangote has to say. All right, let's see what we got here. Yes. All right. Let's see what we got here. All right. Chairman Aliko Dangote in his own words.
Great to be here, and I would like to thank the organizers of GAVI. Well, you know, Africa has diverse areas of investment, but I think one of the greatest area of investment is actually agriculture. People will be surprised that I'll be talking about agriculture. We're also in agriculture, you know, we're pumping quite a lot of money, even though we're very focused in terms of, you know, sugar. But areas of minerals, when you talk about solid minerals, we have not even really scratched the surface. And all what we need to do is just to make sure we process our own minerals rather than exporting the raw materials. Because it doesn't make sense exporting the raw materials because we are not really adding any value. We are not creating jobs. So what we are doing is that we are shipping the raw materials.
We're seeing that happen with the cashew nut industry.
Cashew nuts, cocoa, you know. So what we are doing is that we're actually exporting jobs out and then importing poverty into our continent. And that has to stop.
Right.
So, I mean, in the areas of our own investment, yes, we have actually invested heavily in the last couple of years in oil and gas, which is almost, we spent between the fertilizer, refinery, cement, sugar backward integration in 7 years, we actually invested over about $25 billion. So why are we doing that? Because we are doing that to show confidence.
Right.
Because if we don't really move by investing in our continent, it will be very difficult for other people to be convinced
to come and
invest.
On our continent.
So we need to tell them that, look, there is quite a lot of things happening in Africa, and sky is the limit.
Right.
You know, and yes, of course, there are some few issues here and there, but those issues are solvable.
Right. And you've also spoken about the need to build a robust manufacturing base in Africa, right? What do you see as some of the immediate priorities to accelerate that transition towards manufacturing and value addition across the African continent?
Well, value addition, if you look at all what we are doing as a group, is actually transforming our raw materials into finished goods. Let's say, for instance, cement. Our own cement, when we started cement, Nigeria was only producing 1.9 million tons. When we moved into cement, we started our first factory was 2007. And by today, Nigeria is in production of about over 55 million tons. So we started from scratch, but we made sure that we are not only self-sufficient, we are also a major exporter of cement, which we did.
Right.
And then we look at fertilizer. There is no way when you talk about Africa, the biggest thing about Africa is agriculture. So now, how can we talk about agriculture being the biggest in Africa if we don't produce our own fertilizer? You know, so in the last couple of years, in sub-Saharan Africa, we had zero fertilizer production, which is urea mainly. And both ourselves, we now built 3 million tons capacity. There's also another company, Indorama. Indorama also built another 3 million tons capacity. So we're able to make Nigeria self-sufficient, and we're able to serve other African countries, and we export out to US. Then you look at it now, we look at oil, petroleum products, and we realize that in the entire African continent, there are only 2 countries that don't import petroleum products, which is Algeria and Libya.
Right.
And that really pushes us into saying, okay, you know what? We need to save our continent. But where do we start from? So we have to start from home.
Right.
We started from Nigeria, and now we built about 650,000 barrels a day refinery.
Yeah, before we get to oil, and I want to talk about green energy, because that's a theme that we're hearing a lot about, especially here at the United Nations this week. I wanted to ask you specifically about some of the measures that you think we need to accelerate. There's a lot of hope in on the Africa Free Trade Continental Area, of course, to alleviate that, but it doesn't seem to be making movement. How do you think we can accelerate on that?
Well, to accelerate on the free trade, first of all, we need to do a couple of things. One of the things that we need to do is to make sure we liberate ourselves and allow free movement of people, goods, and services. Like what I keep saying, you know, today, somebody who is holding maybe even American passport or British passport, he has more access to countries than me as an African. So, you know, unless we're allowed to mingle among ourselves, if I cannot visit you, I can't do business with you. So what we need to do is really to remove these restrictions about visa among
It's starting
Africans.
to happen, though. It's starting to happen. We're seeing it happen.
It started to happen, but maybe only 3 countries. You're talking about Rwanda, I think Benin, and which is the other country. There are only 3 of them. That's okay, fine. Africans, they can just come, you know, visa free. But if I'm an investor, okay, I say that there's an African country, for example, where we invested $650 million, but I still do need a visa as an African, despite that we have the highest African investment. So it doesn't make sense. What we need to do to make sure that we unleash the potentials of Africa is to remove all these issues about, yes, because I mean, thank you. Why are you talking about no security? Because majority of all these guys who are working with different governments, they're talking about security. No, I mean, there's no risk in terms of security because you can see Rwanda. What happened? Do they have any security challenges? No. So those guys who normally make trouble among Africans, they don't need a visa.
Right.
They don't. I mean, you look at you know, all these people who are bandits, Boko Haram, people in Mali, people in Burkina Faso. Those guys, they went through the borders with not only themselves, with their tanks.
Right.
So they don't need a visa.
Remove those barriers. So I was saying, Alaji, one of the themes we're exploring at Dhabi and at the UN this week is Africa as a solution for clean energy. Looking at how we accelerate Africa's rapid transition to sustainable and renewable energy sources. But you have built one of the biggest oil refineries on the continent, just outside of Lagos. What motivated you to venture into this multi-billion-dollar business at a time when the world is tilting towards renewable energy? And how is that, you think, part of the solution the progress towards transitioning.
Transitioning is true. Well, you know, transitioning doesn't happen in one day. Transitioning will happen over a period of time. And if we are going to move from where we are straight into renewable, it's not going to happen. We'll die. Because right now we have 600 million Africans with no power. Okay, so what do we have? We have natural gas, we have coal, we have other things. So what we'll do is that we have to do both at the same time, because finding a replacement for oil is going to take a long time. Do you know what we produce from oil? You produce over 6,800 items from oil. Most likely this your address might be from oil. So we need to address those issues. Right now, we're having several queues. We don't have fuel. If we don't have fuel, what do we do? So we have to start with the refinery.
The world has to transition from oil and gas.
We are also transiting. We are transiting from the fossil fuel. Some of our vehicles, we are changing them to compressed
Where do you
natural gas.
start playing a role in this energy transition?
Well, we are there. We're always the first movers. We will definitely invest in the renewable energy. Now we have achieved setting up a refinery. We have achieved setting up fertilizer. We have achieved setting up a lot of other industries. So we will lead. You see, one thing that we have to get clear is that nobody will develop Africa but Africans.
Yes.
Okay, so no matter what, we must lead before other people are going to get convinced to join us. So we all have to risk our money. I would have decided to invest most of my money in Microsoft, Google, Tesla when stocks were very low. But I decided that no, I need to make my continent great. And that is why I pump so much money into the continent.
Which leads me perfectly into my final question, because we're running out of time. You've been ranked again this year by Forbes as Africa's richest man. Looking beyond the financial returns, of course, what legacy do you hope your investments and your entrepreneurial endeavors will leave on the future generations of Africans? We had Africa's youth voices just a moment here.
Well, you know, to me, really, I think anytime when people address me as Africa's richest person, I really get a little bit uncomfortable or upset. Yes, I'd rather be called somebody who creates the future of Africa. I invest a lot in Africa. And why am I investing a lot? Is to show people that yes, it's doable. And we Africans must lead in terms of this. And we must make sure that this, our youth, we find jobs for them. And that is, I think, the kind of legacy that I want to leave. The legacy that I want to leave is to make Africa self-sufficient for what we consume.
Thank you so much. Alhaji Aliko Dangote, thank you. A round of applause.
Thank you so much.
My thanks and gratitude. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here on the Unstoppable Africa stage.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
All right, fellas. So you just heard Africa's greatest industrialist as well as Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote, share his views on the future of Africa's socio-economic development. And he talked about agriculture as the key to Africa's socio-economic development. Fellows, there's an old saying that starving people is a political problem. And where there is corruption, there is also starvation. And that is the problem with Africa, unfortunately. I mean, we're talking about agriculture, talking about a continent that currently holds the world's largest arable land, but at the same time also happens to be the poorest and the continent with starvation all across the continent. How did it get to this point, fellows? That's the question we have to be asking ourselves. Like I stated earlier, a starving people is a political problem. And where there is corruption, there's also starvation. And that is the problem that Africa faces today. Because of the level of corruption and the level of abuse by leaders of Africa, that is what has contributed to the problem of starvation on that continent. And we're talking about 65% of uncultivated arable land in this world is in Africa, fellows. I came across a study that was done by Bloomberg and The Economist, where they talk about Africa's agriculture will be the future of the world. Basically talking about how Africa is going to be the continent that is going to feed the world in the future. And they talk about this because of the uncultivated arable land that is on that continent, fellows. But at the same time today, that continent is the poorest in this world. And that continent has more people starving than any continent on this world. So how can we have 65% of the world's uncultivated arable land and still have people starving to death on that continent? If not for bad governance, what else is it going to be? And this is what exactly Alhaji Aliko Dangote was talking about in that interview. The agriculture is the key to Africa's socio-economic development. I mean, this is not the first time I've heard him talk about agriculture. A couple of years ago, Aliko Dangote had a sit-down interview with also another Africa's greatest African son, Mo Ibrahim from Sudan, who also talked about agriculture. And as a matter of fact, I did a segment myself about some months ago, about 5 or 6 months ago, when I talk about the key socioeconomic development for Africa in the future should be agriculture, where African governments have to focus, invest in agriculture, I mean mechanized farming, to create food security for its citizens, rather than investing in glass buildings, trying to look like Dubai. I mean, when you have glass buildings lined up in your country and you have starving people, you haven't done anything. So let's focus on investing in agriculture because we already have the land. We have the 65% of uncultivated arable land in the world, fellas. That's what we are talking about. By the same time, we go around the world begging, asking for food from the United States, from Ukraine, Russia, and other parts of the world. I mean, these are continents, places where you have cold, winter, summer, and so on and so forth. Whilst we are blessed, we have been blessed with sunlight 24/7 on that continent. And yet, we cannot make any good use of what God has given us. But rather, we are still at the bottom. We are the ones starving. And those who don't have what we have to export food to come and help feed us. Are you kidding me, fellas? I mean, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. I mean, you're talking about a continent with 65% of the world's uncultivated arable land. But we have to go around the world asking for food. I mean, just a couple of days ago, President Biden of the United States, the US government, pledged about $400 million of food aid to Sudan. $400 million of food aid to Sudan. We should even be ashamed of ourselves. We have to have the United States government pledge $400 million of food aid to Sudan when we have all this arable land on that continent. And we have people starving to death. I mean, it is sad. It is sad. And this goes back to the saying, starving people is a political problem. And where there's starvation, there's also corruption. And at the end of the day, that is why we are starving on that continent. Because of the level of corruption on that continent. I mean, at this UN General Assembly that is going on right now, you had the president of Nigeria calling on world powers, economic powers, US, IMF, World Bank, talking about debt relief, asking for debt relief for the global south. Asking for debt relief. I mean, these Western countries have been giving us debt relief for the past 40, 50 years. And what have we done with it? Nothing. And we still go down there begging, as beggars, asking for debt relief. So that's all we know how to do best. Go to the world and beg for debt relief. I don't even know why these organizations even lend money to African and poor countries in the world. Because if these organizations, IMF, World Bank, and the United States and the European countries want Africa and the poorer countries to do better, They should stop lending money to these countries. Let us use what we have and live within our means and develop what we have to build our economies. That would be the best thing for Africa and the poorer countries around the world. We don't need no handouts. Let's develop what we have and live within our means. But as far as we keep getting handouts, every time you go to people begging for food, begging for loans, begging for help you with infrastructure and so on and so forth, that means you are not going to do anything for yourself. You're not going to strive. You're not going to do anything to strive to better your livelihood. Because at the end of the day, you're always looking for somebody to give you a handout. This goes to say the old saying by conservatives in America, where they say that when you're on welfare, there's no incentive for you to come out of welfare because you always believe that the government is going to be there to provide housing and provide food for you. But if you're not on welfare, there's an incentive for you to go out there and strive for yourself, to better yourself, for yourself to become a better person and for yourself and your family. And that is the same conundrum that African and poorer countries around the world have, because they have become accustomed to going to the world organizations always begging, pleading for aid, for loans. And in essence, they don't use what they have to develop their country. And at the end of the day, what has even these loans done for most of these countries? It ends up going to these corrupt politicians and their crony capitalist friends' hands. So at the end of the day, the vast majority of their own citizens keep suffering. And they keep being burdened with all these bad debts that these corrupt leaders accumulate on their fellow citizens in their various countries. So as a matter of fact, to be frank with you guys, fellows, it's about time. I would love to see the world, rich countries and IMF and the World Bank and so on, stop giving loans to all these African countries and poorer countries around the world. I mean, that would be the best thing for them. I'm telling you, fellows. Because at the end of the day, I mean, Nigerian President Tinubu going to UN, talking about debt relief. What did you do with the money that was given to you? And now you're asking for debt relief. They give them debt relief. 5 years, 2 years down the line, they will go back and ask for debt relief. And that is what they have been doing for the past, 40, 50 years. They have been giving African countries and poorer countries debt relief. And what have they done with it? What have they done with it? Corrupt leaders have stolen that money, invested in their crony capitalist businesses across their country. And that is why most of their countries are still poor and indebted. That is why they are suffering all across the continent. Because at the end of the day, what they do is they get these loans and they don't invest these loans in the right areas of their economies. They don't have their priority street. I mean, I came across this space program that is being initiated by some African countries, Nigeria, Ghana, and Kenya, and all these countries. And I'm like, hold on, fellas. I mean, you have these countries who cannot even feed their citizens. Are you kidding me? These people cannot even feed their own citizens on Earth. And they're talking about space program. I mean, look, don't get me wrong. I understand what space program does in terms of technology and so on, satellite and all that stuff. I get it. But you have to start feeding your citizens first before you take that initiative. As of now, you have a lot of satellites being managed by global institutions and America and Europe and so on. So use that money that you have to invest to help develop your country on Earth and stop worrying about space when you can't even feed your own citizens. I mean, you're going to go ahead and do space programs, spend millions of dollars on space program when you can't even develop your country to feed your citizens. How screwed up are your priorities? I mean, does it make sense to anybody that you have a hungry man in your various African countries sitting down there starving to death? Instead of the government using the money that they have to invest to help develop their country, to make people live better, they're rather going to go and invest in space. Are you kidding me? I mean, these people have their priorities screwed up. I mean, big time. I mean, like you said earlier, about 600 million people on the continent don't have access to electricity. That's what we are talking about, fellas. 600 million people on that continent don't have access to electricity. Meanwhile, their governments are going to find a way to invest money to go and what? Do research to go to space. And the other people are suffering on Earth. I mean, these people, man, I don't know, man. I don't know. You see, like I said earlier, the World Bank, IMF, and these European and American institutions, man, it's about time. They have to cut off these loans to these African countries and poorer countries around the world. Because go back 30, 40 years, all these poorer countries that have taken loans, that are now asking for debt relief, what have they done with the money that they have taken? What have they done with it? What have they done with that money? Stolen that money, pump it into their corrupt, crony capitalist businesses and family businesses all across their countries, and their people are still starving to death. And then they're going to go on to the United Nations begging, asking for debt relief. As if like they're using the money that they've been borrowing, the indebtedness of their various African countries has done anything better for their citizens. I mean, even if you go back and look at the economic situation in most African countries today, in terms of looking at the level of poverty, and you compare it to 40, 50, 60 years ago, a country like Nigeria, the level of poverty right now is worse than 50, 60 years ago in Nigeria. Worse. So are we moving forward or are we moving backwards? That's the question we have to be asking ourselves. Are we moving forward or are we moving backwards? And they're going to have the president of the country go to the United Nations begging for debt relief. When they get the debt relief, what do they do with it? Steal the money, keep it among themselves and their crony businessmen and politicians. And at the end of the day, they are citizens who are indebted with all this borrowing end up continue suffering. I mean, that's a shame. That's a shame. You know, we don't have our priorities straight. That's the problem. We don't have our priorities straight. I mean, you talk about a country, a continent with 600 million people who don't have access to electricity. I mean, Africa's population is about what? 1.4 billion. All right? That's what we are talking about, 1.4 billion. So if 1.4 billion and you have 600 million of your population don't have access to electricity, I mean, come on, fellows. Come on. Meanwhile, you go to these corrupt countries in Africa and you look at their leaders, they'll be riding in $100,000, $200,000 SUVs. SUVs, $200,000, $200,000 Toyota Land Cruisers. That's what they'll be riding. One government official have about 2 or 3 parked in his house, his or her house. And at the same time, you have about 600 million people on that continent who don't have access to electricity. I mean, what kind of people are you people down there? I mean, that's a question you have to ask yourselves. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. Agriculture, like he said, is the future. I mean, Africa has the most arable land in this on this planet Earth. God-given, gift that God gave to us. But rather we go to African countries on Sundays. You see them in churches, pray for God to come and cultivate that land for them. That's what they do. They go to churches on Sundays, praying to God for help, for God to come and cultivate that land and put food on the table for them. After God has given you the land, has given you the weather, has given you all the resources that you need. Now you want God to come also and then cultivate the land for you and then put food on the table for you. You ain't getting that from God. I'm sorry. You ain't getting nothing from God. He's already giving you enough. He's giving you too much. And if you cannot make use of what he has given you, then that tells you how useless that continent is. There's no ifs and buts about it. I mean, it's a shame that at this modern era, we still keep going around the world, always going for handout, begging, pleading, when we have all these natural resources sitting under our feet. Natural resources, everything that you can ask for is being given to us, sitting under our feet. But yet still, because of bad governance, corrupt leaders and politicians, and crony capitalists, you still are the poorest continent on this earth. But you know what? If we are going to move forward, agriculture is the key. Because a country that cannot feed its people to be able to use that energy to harness development, then you haven't done anything. You can build all the kind of roads and everything that you want to build, But if your people are starving to death, then you haven't done anything. So agriculture is the key. We have arable lands on that continent that our governments have to invest in that area, mechanized farming, invest in that area. That should be our goal of investing. Every African country's goal should be to invest in mechanized farming, to create that wealth that God is giving to Africa. Harness that wealth and use it and stop this starvation and poverty that is so rampant on that continent, that is killing babies, children, all across the continent. So like he said earlier, I mean, agriculture is the key. I did a segment about a couple of months ago, 5 or 6 months, and I talked about it. And Dangote himself has also talked about this agriculture issue. And it's the key because we have everything. We don't have to be sitting in Africa and asking for the United States and Russia and Ukraine. I mean, talk about Ukraine, a country fighting war, has to grow wheat and export to Africa? Are you kidding me? And we think it's all good. I mean, we are not even ashamed of it. When they go to the United Nations and beg it, they are not even ashamed. I mean, these people are useless. I mean, you should be even ashamed. I mean, looking at what you have, and then you go to somebody who has cold weather, spring and summer, who don't have all year round weather to harvest or do anything, but you have all of that, and you have to go to him for him to come and feed you. Are you kidding me? And that's what we are talking about. $400 million coming from the United States of America, USA, going to Sudan because of the conflict going on down there right now. People are starving down there to death. And we don't care about all of that. All we think about power, fighting among ourselves, killing each other. And at the expense of it is the poor children, boys and girls, and poor families and women who die because of that. I mean, the world should stop giving loans to Africa. I mean, look, I'm a strong advocate for it. I don't believe in it. Because if you are not held to that level of that standard, and every time you believe that you can go and somebody's going to hand stuff out to you, that at the end of the day, you're not going to be responsible. I mean, the same way we run our countries is the same way you're supposed to run your household. Because at the end of the day, you keep handing out. Every time you keep going to the world, we need debt relief, we need aid, we need food, we need this. And they keep giving it to you. When you have resources that you can turn around to make your citizens or your country better. But because every time you keep going to them, for how many years? How long have we been coming to the West and asking for aid? I mean, now today we're talking about China. Go back 50 years, 60 years ago. China was a poor country. But look at how China have moved on to get to where they are today. That is what we have to be looking at. We have to be developing what we have now to move to the level where everybody is moving to. But we cannot keep sitting down there asking for handouts. When we have everything that you can ask for on our feet. But at the same time, because of bad governance, corrupt leaders, corrupt crony capitalists in our various countries, selfish men who don't give a damn about their citizens, they are like vultures, like I said before. They are like vultures. They prey on the weak, the poor, and the sick in their societies. Because if they do care, then they're going to invest in areas that will end up benefiting these very poor people in their various African countries. It is unfortunate, fellows. It is very, very unfortunate. But this is the same old, fellows. I mean, next year, UN General session will come on, and you're going to hear another African leader going out there saying the same old damn BS, asking for debt relief, asking for aid, and all this and all that. I mean, we have crude oil, we have gas, we have all of these natural resources, name them. And yet, 600 million people of our citizens on that continent don't have access to electricity. But meanwhile, you have your leaders who will spend lavishly. I mean, go to this United Nations General Assembly session that is going on down there. And go to the hotels in New York, the Wisteria and so on, these big hotels in New York, and you'll find out the poor countries presidents and their delegates, they are the ones who sleep in the luxury hotels. And the richer countries' delegates sleep in the ordinary hotels. I mean, go figure, fellows. That tells you your problem. That's where your problem is. That is where your problem is. I mean, the poorer countries, go down there, go to New York, and you see them there walking around Fifth Avenue and so on, so on, doing all this shopping in these expensive stores in New York for their delegates at your expense. At your expense. And then they turn around and go to these rich countries and beg for money, aid, to go and feed their citizens. Are you kidding me? Nobody should give them no aid. Let them go back to their countries and build their countries. Don't give them no aid. I don't advocate for any aid to be given to any African or poorer countries. I mean, this is what, but unfortunately, see, the whole thing is, I mean, these Western countries, man, I mean, to me, they are more like a part of the problem. They are more of part of the problem. They are accessory to the problem, because at the end of the day, they know what the solutions are. They understand that we have all these things. They know it. But for them to keep us where we are, for them to control us, they have to convince us that we always need them. So that's why they keep doing that to us. They give you this little aid here and there, and they keep coming back, because they're controlling you with that. And that is why they keep inviting us, getting us into that conundrum, always coming to them asking for aid. And then we send here $1 million here, $1 million there, $1, and all that stuff to them. And as far as they keep doing that to you, that means they control the levers of your economic situation as well as everything in your country. And that's how they want us to be. They want you there. So they can tell you what to do. They can tell you when to shut the hell up and when to speak. And that's very unfortunate. But unfortunately, you don't have leaders who have your countries at heart. You have corrupt, crooked leaders. All they care is about themselves and their crony capitalist family businesses and friends' businesses, and then keep stealing your money, you know, and investing them in Dubai and Europe and America, whilst majority of their citizens starve to death. You know, these people don't give a damn about you guys down there. It is unfortunate, but the key to Africa's socio-economic development, we have the land. We have 65% of uncultivated arable land on this planet Earth, fellows. That's what we're talking about. Let's invest in that area. Let's invest seriously in agriculture and keep ourselves in that situation, and that will help us develop and move on from there to the other sectors that we have to move to. All right, fellows. If it's Sunday, it's the Africa Weekly Talk. God bless you guys and have a great week. Thank you guys, and peace and love.